The night the world shifted was wrapped in choir echoes and rain. Elena stood behind the cracked church door, the wood damp beneath her palm. Inside, the reverend's voice lilted like a hymn, but the shadow that moved across the pulpit didn't match his tone. She saw the glint of metal, the terrified whimper of a child. Mara's eyes met hers for 1 second, pleading, silent, eternal. Then the light snapped off, leaving only breath, thunder, and sin. She wanted to scream, but Ruth's hand clamped over her mouth, pulling her back into the dark. "You didn't see anything," her mother whispered, trembling. "We keep quiet for God's sake." The thunder swallowed the truth. Elena's tears mixed with the rain as the church bells tolled. Not for worship, but for the first grave secret that would bury them all. The morning after felt stolen from time. Sunlight poured through gray clouds that seemed ashamed of what they had hidden. Elena sat at the breakfast table, her hands trembling over untouched coffee. Ruth hummed an old hymn, her voice brittle, forcing normalcy into the suffocating air. "Forget what you think you saw," her mother murmured, eyes fixed on the crucifix above the door. "You'll destroy lives if you speak of it." But Elena couldn't erase the image. Mara's face pale as the moon, her eyes screaming without sound. When the church bell rang, Elena flinched so hard her chair scraped the floor. Ruth's expression didn't change. "You'll go to service," she said, voice hollow. "And you'll smile." Elena nodded, but inside, her heart whispered rebellion, small and dangerous as a spark trapped under glass. The church service was a pageant of false grace. Reverend Dorn's voice rose in holy cadence, his hands lifted to the heavens, the same hands that had reached into darkness. Elena sat in the back pew, her pulse echoing louder than the hymns. Lydia Crane, pale and exhausted, sat 2 rows ahead, her fingers gripping her husband's arm as if prayer alone could bring Mara home. When Dorn's gaze swept across the congregation, it lingered on Elena for a heartbeat too long. A cold recognition passed between them. She knew, and he knew she knew. His smile didn't falter. It widened, immaculate, radiant. Elena lowered her eyes, her breath catching in her throat, knowing that silence was no longer safety. It was a cage. That night, Elena walked a field behind her house where the fog rolled low like ghosts unburied. Every sound seemed a whisper, every shadow an accusation. Her mind replayed the night before, the candlelight, the silence, the storm. She wanted to believe she'd imagined it, that her eyes had betrayed her. But in the mud beneath her feet, something gleamed. A small, silver locket. She bent, fingers trembling to pick it up. Inside was a photograph of Lydia and Mara, smiling. Her breath caught, cold as frost. It couldn't have washed this far unless someone wanted it found. Behind her, a branch snapped. She turned sharply. Nothing but fog. Yet, the air carried a faint voice, childlike and broken. "Why didn't you help me?" Elena couldn't sleep. The walls whispered prayers her mother never finished. She sat by her bedroom window, moonlight pooling across her desk where the locket now rested. Her reflection stared back at her, hollow, accusing. A knock shattered the quiet. Ruth's voice trembled through the door. "Elena, go to bed. You'll wake the dead with your pacing." Elena almost laughed at the irony. She opened her mouth to confess, to say she'd seen too much, but the words died when she heard the church bell again. 3 slow tolls at midnight. It was impossible. No one rang it this late. She looked out the window toward the church on the hill, its dark shape looming. The bell stopped, but the echo remained, heavy as a warning. The secret wasn't buried. It was stirring. 5 years slipped by like dust over a grave, yet the sound of that midnight bell still haunted Elena's dreams. She had built a life of silence, teaching literature, smiling on cue, burying truth under routine. But the past began to claw through her careful walls when a transfer student walked into her classroom with Mara's same shade of eyes. Green, fractured, frightened. Her name was Clara, but the resemblance struck like lightning. That afternoon, Elena found an anonymous note on her desk. "You saw what you weren't meant to. Don't dig again." Her throat tightened. The handwriting was unmistakable. Reverend Dorn's. Guilt turned to nausea. For years she'd obeyed fear. But now the secret wanted to breathe. By evening, the note's poison had fully taken root. Elena walked the narrow streets, the autumn wind cutting through her coat. The church loomed ahead, restored, repainted, pristine, as though nothing had ever happened there. A poster for the upcoming Faith Renewal Week fluttered against the gate, bearing Reverend Dorn's serene smile. She almost turned away, but a voice startled her. "Miss Marrow?" Detective Jonah Vexler stood by his car, coat collar turned up, cigarette ember glowing. "You were close to the Cranes, weren't you?" His tone wasn't casual. She froze, nodding. "We're reopening the case," he said, eyes narrowing. Something new came up. The wind carried the church bells again, faint and deliberate. Something was shifting. The grave of truth had cracked. The next morning, Elena visited Lydia for the first time in years. The Crane home had aged like grief. Peeling paint. Curtains drawn tight. Silence dense as fog. Lydia opened the door slowly, her face gaunt but eyes still sharp. "You came," she whispered, voice half disbelief, half resentment. Inside, the air smelled of wilted lilies and candle wax. A framed photo of Mara sat on the mantel, dusted with care. "They said you moved on," Lydia said, brittle smile trembling. Elena's reply caught in her throat. "I never could." Lydia's hands clenched. "Then don't make me relive it." But when Elena mentioned the reopened case, something flickered in Lydia's gaze. Fear, not hope. The kind of fear that meant she, too, had secrets chained in silence. That night, Elena couldn't escape the sound. The faint toll of a bell carried through the wind, echoing from the direction of the old church. She followed it across the fields, her flashlight beam trembling. The doors were locked, yet a single window stood ajar. She climbed through, landing softly on the carpeted aisle. The air smelled of incense and dust. At the altar, something new had been placed. A small silver locket, identical to the one she'd found years ago. Her pulse hammered. On the floor beside it, a message scratched into wood. "You were warned." She stumbled back, knocking over a candle, wax spilling like tears. The firelight flickered across the crucifix, and for a brief, horrifying moment, it seemed to smile. The next day, Reverend Dorn visited her classroom under the guise of prayer. His voice was honeyed, his smile perfect, but his eyes were knives. "You've been restless lately, Miss Marrow," he said softly, standing too close. "It wounds me to see a soul struggle so." She stepped back, pulse quickening. "The past doesn't die just because you say it does," she replied, her voice barely steady. His smile faltered. "Careful what ghosts you chase. Some are better left in their graves." As he left, he brushed her desk. And when she looked down, she found a single silver bead from a rosary lying there. It shimmered faintly under the classroom light, a quiet threat. Elena realized the Reverend's warnings had begun again. But this time, she wasn't going to obey. Rain returned with the memories. Elena sat in her car outside Lydia's house, gripping the steering wheel as if it were the only solid thing left. She had spent the night rereading her old journals, each entry a wound reopened. When Lydia finally appeared in the doorway, her face was drawn and wary. "You shouldn't be here," she said, but her voice lacked conviction. Inside, the air was heavy with candle smoke and fear. "He's watching us," Lydia whispered, glancing toward the curtained window. He always has. Elena leaned forward. You knew, she said quietly. Lydia's eyes glistened. I thought if I stayed silent, he'd stop. A tear slipped down her cheek. But Mara, she tried to run. The words shattered the stillness, and for the first time, the truth began to bleed. Detective Wexler met Elena in a diner the next morning, the kind of place where secrets dissolved in coffee steam. He spread old crime scene photos across the table. Muddy footprints, torn cloth, the remnants of a child's shoe. We found new DNA traces, he said, voice low. Not Mara's. Not Dorn's either. Someone else was there. Elena's pulse skipped. Ruth, she whispered without thinking. Wexler frowned. Your mother? Elena nodded slowly, her mind racing through fragments. The night of the storm. Ruth's trembling hands. Her insistence on silence. Wexler leaned in, eyes sharp. If she knows something, I need her statement. Elena's gaze fell to the photograph of the locket. You'll get more than a statement, she murmured. You'll get the truth. That evening, Elena confronted her mother. Ruth sat in her favorite armchair, rosary beads slipping through her fingers like sand. How long have you known? Elena demanded. Ruth didn't look up. You think you can fight God's will? She muttered. Elena's voice cracked. God's will didn't make you cover up a crime. The beads stilled. I did it for you, Ruth whispered. He said he'd ruin us, that no one would believe a word you said. And he was right. Look at him now. A savior in their eyes. Elena sank to her knees, the room spinning. You chose him over her, she said. Ruth's tears fell freely now. I chose survival. The words hung in the air like smoke. The last pillar of trust crumbled between them. The next day, Elena followed Ruth to the church. Her mother's steps were slow, deliberate, as though walking toward her own reckoning. Inside, Reverend Dorn waited by the altar, the morning sun breaking through stained glass in fractured colors. You shouldn't have come, he said softly, though his voice carried steel. Ruth trembled. It's time, she whispered. Elena stepped out from behind the pews, her presence slicing through the tension. Dorn's smile faltered. Ah, he said, eyes cold. The prodigal truth-teller. Elena's voice was steady, no more hiding. The three of them stood beneath the cross, faith, fear, and corruption bound in one frame. As the church bells began to toll, each chime like a heartbeat counting down to the inevitable. That night, Lydia called Elena in a panic. He knows we talked, she whispered through the static. He came to my house, said confession could cleanse any sin. The line crackled, then went dead. Elena's heart pounded as she raced through the storm-slick streets to Lydia's home. The front door stood open, curtains flailing in the wind. Inside, silence, thick and wrong. On the table, a single note written in Dorn's ornate script. Forgiveness is not for everyone. A half-burned candle still flickered beside it, the flame bending as though mourning. Elena's scream broke the night. The secret was no longer contained. It had become blood. The town's calm was a facade cracking at the edges. Lydia's disappearance flooded the news, whispers spreading through pews and markets. Elena sat in her darkened living room, the note from Dorn lying on her desk like a serpent. Each word, forgiveness is not for everyone, pulsed with venom. She turned on her recorder, her voice trembling at first, then hardening with resolve. My name is Elena Marrow, she began, and I've been silent for too long. The confession spilled out. The night she saw Mara, her mother's complicity, the Reverend's threats. Her voice broke when she reached Lydia's name. I'm afraid, she whispered, but not of him anymore, of what keeping quiet has made me. She pressed stop, her chest heaving. Outside, A car engine idled in the rain. Elena brought the recording to Detective Wexler the next morning, her nerves taut as wires. He listened in silence, his face carved from stone. When it ended, he leaned back, exhaling slowly. "You understand what this means?" he said. "You're accusing one of the most powerful men in this county, and your own mother." Elena nodded, voice steady. "The truth doesn't care who it destroys." Wexler studied her, then nodded. "I'll need a copy. We'll move quietly." But before she could hand it over, his phone buzzed. His expression changed, dread replacing control. "Ruth Marrow," he murmured. "She's been found." Elena's heart froze. "Where?" His voice dropped. "At the river." The riverbank was lined with police lights, their red and blue glow dancing across the black water. Ruth's car had veered off the bridge, or so they said. Elena stood behind the tape, numb, her coat whipping in the cold wind. When they pulled the body out, her mother's rosary tangled in her hands. She didn't cry. She only stared at the cross glinting between Ruth's fingers, the same one Doran had given her years ago. Wexler touched her shoulder gently. "We'll find who did this," but Elena already knew. Doran's message was clear, repentance through silence. She looked up at the church steeple in the distance, its bell still and black against the sky. "No," she said softly. "We'll make him confess." Elena buried her mother beneath gray skies and heavy silence. The congregation turned out in force, led by Reverend Dorn, his eulogy delivered with perfect sorrow. "Ruth Marrow was a woman of faith," he intoned, eyes flicking briefly toward Elena. "She knew the value of keeping peace." Every word scraped against her like glass. When the final hymn ended, Dorn approached her graveside, offering his hand. "I'll pray for your healing," he said softly. She met his gaze, the ghost of a smile on her lips. "Don't," she whispered. "You'll need those prayers yourself." His hand froze midair, and for the first time she saw it. Fear, thin as a hairline crack across his polished composure. That night, Elena sat before her window, the recorder beside her, the church visible in the distance. She pressed play. Her own voice filled the room like a ghost. As she listened, she realized the confession wasn't just for the police. It was for everyone who'd been silenced by him, by fear, by faith, twisted into control. She opened her laptop and uploaded the file. The title read, "The Reverend's Truth." As it began to process, she felt a strange calm, the first in years. But through the window, movement, a shadow crossing her yard. The lights flickered. From the darkness, a voice drifted. Smooth, familiar. "Forgiveness is still possible, Elena." Her pulse stopped. Reverend Dorn's silhouette stood by the gate. The truth was finally coming for him, and for her. By morning, the video had spread like wildfire. The townspeople whispered in every diner, every pew, every corner of the market. The Reverend's truth. Elena's voice, trembling but unflinching, recounting the night of Mara's disappearance and the shadow of corruption that bound them all. The church's website crashed within an hour. Reporters flooded the streets, but Dorn was already moving. He stood at the pulpit that evening, denying every word, painting Elena as a woman unwell, twisted by grief and guilt. Elena watched the live broadcast from her classroom, fury boiling under her skin. Yet beneath his honeyed tone she saw it. The faint twitch in his jaw, the subtle tremor in his hands. The truth was unraveling him, even as he tried to drown it in lies. Detective Wexler called her that night. "You started something you can't stop," he said. His voice tight with urgency. The church boards closing ranks. They've erased records, sealed donations, scrubbed everything clean. Elena stared at her wall, the shadows stretching like bars. "Then I'll burn their walls down with words," she replied. But Wexler's silence chilled her. "Be careful," he finally said. "People like Dorn don't fall. They drag others down with them." As he hung up, a car door slammed outside. She parted the curtains. Across the street, a group of parishioners watched her house, faces blank, candles in hand. The vigil of devotion or intimidation? The line between faith and threat had vanished. The next morning, Elena found her classroom vandalized. Pages of scripture scattered across the floor, liar scrawled in red across the chalkboard. She stood motionless, breath shaking, as students peeked through the doorway. "Who did this?" one whispered. She didn't answer. Instead, she took a piece of chalk and wrote over the word liar. Truth. The room fell silent. When the principal arrived, flustered and sweating, he told her she was suspended. "For your safety," he insisted. But Elena saw fear in his eyes, not concern. As she walked out, she passed a student who whispered, "I believe you." It was Clara, the girl with Mara's eyes. And in that fleeting moment, hope flickered alive, fragile but fierce. That evening, Elena met Wexler again at a quiet motel by the highway. He looked older, worn thin by unseen wars. "We've got him," he said, sliding a folder across the table. Inside, photographs, bank statements, transfers from church accounts to charity missions that didn't exist. "It's enough to start an arrest," he said. "But not without your cooperation." Elena nodded, hands trembling. "I'm in." As she reached for the papers, the lights flickered. Wexler frowned, reaching for his gun. Outside, a car engine roared, headlights flooding the window, then the sound of shattering glass. Elena ducked instinctively. When she looked up, Wexler was slumped forward, blood blooming across his chest. The folder lay open beside him, truth and death mingling in red. Elena drove through the storm with the folder clutched beside her, sirens wailing in the distance. Her headlights cut through sheets of rain as she climbed the hill toward the church, the place where everything began. She parked at the gate, soaked and trembling, clutching the files like scripture. Inside, candles flickered on every pew, the congregation kneeling in eerie silence. Dorn stood at the altar, waiting, his expression calm, almost welcoming. "You've brought judgment upon yourself," he said softly. "No," she replied, stepping forward, voice steady. "I've brought it to you." She threw the folder onto the altar, documents spilling like confessions. As thunder cracked above, the crowd gasped, and for the first time the reverend looked afraid. The church erupted into chaos. Congregants shouted, some in disbelief, others in fury. Dorn's voice rose above the din. "She lies! She is possessed by guilt and madness." But his words faltered under the weight of evidence fluttering across the marble floor. Elena stood firm as police sirens wailed outside, blue lights spilling through stained glass. Wexler's backup had arrived, too late for him, but just in time for justice. "You can't silence everyone," she said, her voice cutting through the uproar. Dorn stepped down from the altar, face trembling. "Do you think they'll believe a broken woman over God's chosen?" She stared back, calm and cold. "God's chosen doesn't bleed lies." The church doors burst open. Flashlights swept the aisle. The reckoning had begun. Hours later, the church lay empty, crime tape strung across the pews like a wound stitched shut. Elena sat in the back of a police car, drenched and shivering, watching as they led Dorn out in handcuffs. His eyes found hers, calm again, too calm. "You didn't win," he murmured, almost kindly. "You've only freed the devil you feared." She stared back through the glass, heart heavy but unwavering. "Then at least he's no longer hiding behind a cross." As the car door closed behind him, thunder rumbled low and final. For the first time in years, She felt her lungs fill fully, the air sharp, real, untainted. But beneath relief, a shadow still lingered. Lydia was gone. Her mother was gone, and Mara's ghost had not yet been laid to rest. Days passed in uneasy quiet. Reporters filled the streets, each headline a mirror reflecting fragments of the truth. Pastor arrested in missing girl case. Local teacher exposes church scandal. Yet for Elena, the noise only deepened the silence within. She visited the field behind her home, the place where she'd found Mara's locket years ago. The fog had returned, rolling low and silver. She knelt, fingers grazing the damp grass, whispering, "I did it, Mara. He can't hurt anyone now." But the wind seemed to whisper back. Not peace, but something unresolved. The earth felt restless. A faint glimmer caught her eye. Another locket, half buried. When she opened it, inside was not Mara's picture, but Ruth's. Her stomach turned. The past hadn't finished speaking. Elena returned home that evening to find her door ajar. Her pulse spiked. Inside, the lights were off, but the faint smell of incense lingered. On the table her recorder sat, the same one that had captured her confession. A red light blinked. Someone had played it. Slowly, she pressed rewind and hit play. But what came through the speakers wasn't her voice. It was Dorn's, calm, measured, deliberate. "Evil hides in everyone," it said, "even those who believe they've conquered it." Her hands trembled as his voice continued, "You think this ends with me, Elena. You don't know what your mother kept from you." The recording ended in silence. Her reflection in the dark window stared back, pale and shaking. The truth had deeper roots than she'd known. The next morning, Elena drove to the county archives, her mind racing with the recording's final words. After hours of searching, she found it. A sealed adoption record, dated 15 years ago, signed by Ruth Marrow and Reverend Caleb Dorn. The child's name, Mara Crane. Her breath hitched. Lydia's daughter wasn't just a victim. She was part of the Reverend's hidden legacy. The pieces fell together in horrifying clarity. Ruth had helped hide the child's true origins, the reason for Dorn's hold over them all. Elena closed the file, tears spilling silently. Justice had come, but not purity. The truth, like faith, was flawed, fragile, bruised, and human. And as she stepped outside into the rising sun, she whispered, "It'll tell it all." Every last word. The town tried to heal, but some wounds resist closure. The church was shuttered, its doors chained and its windows boarded, the steeple no longer tolling against the wind. Elena walked through the empty square where parishioners once gathered, the silence heavier than prayer. Reporters had moved on, leaving behind echoes of scandal, and faith turned sour. Yet beneath the quiet, guilt lingered like smoke. She'd exposed him, yes, but every revelation had taken someone from her. Ruth, Lydia, Vexler. Even Mara's name had become a wound. The town whispered rather than mourned. Elena stood before the church gates, eyes fixed on the crucifix above the door. "Justice isn't peace," she murmured. "It's just the echo that follows." Weeks passed before Elena gathered the courage to visit the river. The water moved slow and cold beneath the bridge, carrying reflections of gray sky and memory. She placed a single white flower where her mother's car had gone under. "I know why you did it," she whispered. "You were trying to save me." The confession felt lighter in the air than it had on her tongue. She imagined Ruth's voice answering, soft and trembling. "Silence is not salvation, child." Elena smiled faintly through tears. "No," she said. "It never was." A gust of wind scattered the petals downstream, carrying them into the distance where loss and forgiveness finally met. When the trial began, the courtroom overflowed with faces once blinded by devotion. Dorn sat at the defendant's table, his clerical collar gone, his calm demeanor crack. Elena took the stand, her voice clear, but hollowed by everything it had cost her to get there. She told them about the storm, the child, the silence that followed. Every word an exorcism. Dorn's lawyer objected, twisted, denied, but the evidence spoke louder than faith. When she finished, the courtroom was silent. Dorn looked at her for a long moment, then smiled. Not pious, but empty. "You think truth redeems," he said softly. "It only replaces one lie with another." Elena's eyes met his. "Then let this be the last one." The gavel struck. The past broke like glass. Months later, Elena returned to her classroom. The walls had been repainted, the word liar long gone. Students whispered as she walked in. Not with scorn, but reverence. On her desk, a small envelope awaited her. Inside was a note written in careful handwriting. "Thank you for saving us." No name, just a pressed daisy folded within. She looked toward the back row, where Clara sat, the girl with Mara's eyes, smiling shyly. For the first time, Elena felt warmth that wasn't followed by dread. Today, she told the class, "We're reading about truth, and what it costs." Outside, sunlight poured through the windows. Inside, her voice carried softly, steady as a hymn reborn from ash. That evening, Elena walked the road beyond town, the air clear, the sunset bleeding gold over the horizon. She carried one last locket, the one she'd found in the field, Ruth's inside. At the edge of the woods, she dug a small hole and placed it in the earth. "No more secrets," she said quietly. "Not even mine." As she covered it, a gentle breeze stirred the trees, whispering like a sigh of release. The sky darkened, the first stars emerging one by one. Elena looked up, her reflection faint in the tears she no longer hid. The past had devoured so much, but not her. She had broken the silence, and in doing so, she'd finally heard what truth sounds like. Not thunder, not screams, but peace.